Sup guys, Eden here, and welcome to another visual novel we're doing. I'm so excited. I know it's been a while since we finished up Higanbana, and it's been about 2,000 subs since I was supposed to do a special for you guys. I was just trying really hard to find a visual novel that I think you all would enjoy. Something that doesn't really involve choices or anything like that. Like a kinetic visual novel, and I've been looking and looking and looking, and I wanted to stay in the horror genre, and I happened to stumble across this one called Phenomeno. It's based on a short horror story written by somebody. I really couldn't tell you. I think it's Hajime Ninomae, and it's from Seikaisha. And the artwork apparently is beautiful. For those of you who ever seen Hi Bonnie Renmei, it's a story about like basically angels who have fallen. But it's an old anime, and the artwork is beautiful. But if anyone of you have ever seen it, you'll recognize the art style. It's by that same artist. So I don't know really what to expect with this. I'm going in this blind. So let's just do this and see where it gets us, okay? So with that being said, on to Phenomeno. There are things that shouldn't be seen. Often said my late grandmother, and that was quite true. I was drawn to the occult from childhood, and upon entering university, I learned the truth of those words by stepping many times into the edges of the netherworld. Ghosts, beings which no one can decisively determine whether they exist or not. The story that begins here revolves around stories brought forth by them. And this story, it can also be said to be the story of it and I. As its eyes glimmer in front of strangeness, as it breathes out words with a bedazzled expression, it warped the world that I always believed in. It made me anxious of whether the ground I stood on would shake. I would want to look over my shoulder just by listening, and I grew to fear whether someone were peeking from the dark shadow of the door. Maybe it was because the words it spoke included truths about the other side. It included truths that only applied to the scant, grotesque, waning dead ones. Now, after it has disappeared, do I finally know that. As grandmother said, it was a world that I should not have seen. It was a story that was not for the living person. However, I intend to speak of that. I intend to speak about all of that. Because if I don't, it wouldn't be able to rest in peace. Because it, having lived on the edge of darkness, having struggled through the threshold of darkness, would not be able to live in peace. Yes, I'll say it once more. From here on is a story that shouldn't be known. Hey, Mother. If the beings called ghosts existed in this world, would it ever be possible for someone to prove their existence such that no one anywhere could argue otherwise? I think it would be impossible no matter how much humanity evolves. On the flip side, it also means no one anywhere could prove it irrefutably that they do not exist. From that standpoint, to discuss whether ghosts exist or not is a complete waste of time. That's why people who can emerge victorious from such a discussion must be people who can purely enjoy ghosts as a source of entertainment. Indeed, I fall under that group, and you could call me quite bluntly as an occult maniac. Mother may not know, but this is quite a niche existence in the world. To be of my age and go ghost this, UMA that, I know that people laugh at people like me, but, there are plenty of things in the world that are inexplicable. Yes. For example, the house I'm living in. This old, almost 30 years old building is by the side of the Tamagawa Waterworks, and partly because it's located in such an odd place, has an incredibly low rent. When I came to Tokyo this spring, I looked for a cheap apartment and found this place. It takes 10 minutes of biking to reach a convenience store. It's surrounded by darkness and covered by a thick copse, and because there are no streetlights in the area, it's completely dark at night. However, I enjoy this old building. It was built like an old mountain cottage, as the first floor was a garage and the second and third floors were a blowout, so it was more than luxurious for a person living alone. The kitchen was as cramped as a kitchenette, but it had a living room, a Japanese-style room, a bath, and even an atelier. From what I hear, an architect had designed it as a personal workplace. I liked it at first sight. Furthermore, for a place with a bath to be just 30,000 yen in Tokyo, Musashino was unthinkably rare, and it even came with an oral story that could not be ignored. This is a house that grants wishes, so said the smiling real estate agent who introduced this place to me. The architect who built this became famous, the illustrator who moved in became busy and moved closer to the city, and the young couple that was living here until last month gave birth to a baby, which led to this becoming open. You are quite lucky. After hearing that, who wouldn't immediately seal the deal? So, I jumped at the opportunity. There was probably a feeling of superiority too, given that my colleagues at university pay over twice the rent and live in rabbit cages. In any case, I was quite pleased at how lucky a man I was with my first time living alone. Yet, within a month, I realized how big of a mistake that was. I can hear sounds somewhere when I'm sleeping at night. The squeaking of something persistently attempting to open some old door. I'd assumed it was just some bad structuring somewhere, but I soon realized that it was odd that it always happened at 2 a.m. I tried going to the living room from my bedroom at the edge of the second floor, and the sound would stop. I thought maybe it was coming from above and went to the atelier on the third floor, but there was nothing that could be the source of the sound. I'd planned to eventually organize it to be cooler, but at the moment it was a bare environment with just my desk and a bookshelf. I looked around, but the windows were all shut, so there was nothing to make a sound. After that, I went to the toilet and the bath. However, I could not find anything that could be connected to the sound. So I thought maybe I'm just hearing things and went to sleep again. But then the sound started again. Squeak. The sound of old wood groaning. I could also hear the sound of something scraping. It wasn't like a mouse or a cat. It was an eerie sound. Like something trying to crawl out of somewhere dark after having been tormented for a long time. Eventually, that sound stopped seemingly echoing throughout the house, and felt like it was seeping through the atmosphere around my ear. As a result, I began keeping the lights on throughout the house and using earplugs when sleeping. However, the problem stopped being just sound. It was about 2 weeks ago. I found a decisive thing. I found 7 carved into the wall of the landing of the stairs with something sharp. I immediately checked the doors and windows around the house, but there didn't seem to have been anyone entering. I was probably terrified. It was a pretty big engraving, but I forced myself to think I had just never noticed it before. A few days later, I found near the bathtub 6. Something sharp had carved it into the windowsill. And then a week ago, I found near the toilet 5. And even this easygoing person had to believe it. Something was in this house. And that this was some countdown. I immediately jumped out of the house. I couldn't live in the house anymore. I hadn't made any close friends yet at university, so I lived in karaoke boxes and net cafes for several days. I couldn't talk about this to anyone. I didn't know any monks nor any mediums. Then I realized, right, maybe the people from Ikai Kabuchi, Edge of the Netherworld, would be perfect for discussing this with. The colleagues of mine whom were also into the occult world may believe me. And so, incidentally, they aren't suspicious people at all. No, we're plenty suspicious. Huh? I recoiled at the sudden voice from above. When I looked up, I saw Karasu's white face and she was waving her hand. Yo, Nagi. Karasu, since when were you there? I checked the time on my cell phone. It was 10:30 p.m. There was still 30 minutes until the offline meeting was taking place at 11. Right around when you began explaining the house that grants wishes to your mother. That's basically the start. I complained as I grumpily placed my stationery back into my bag. Sorry, but peeping is like our trait, said Karasu as she smiled cutely. This was a family restaurant near Itsukai Ichikai Road. We were going to have an emergency offline meeting here with the members of an occult site I frequent. And of course, Karasu wasn't her real name. It was a handle that she used online. Just as I, Yamada Nagito, go by the name Nagi, she went by Karasu. This was the 3rd time we'd met, but I still didn't know her real name. However, she was a veteran on the Ikai Kabuchi site and thus a big senior to me, who'd only begun looking at the site this spring. Her appearance was as usual, a purplish velvet dress that reached her ankles, and below that was just a black camisole, or rather, her chest was completely bare. Her breasts looked like they would jump out at any time, which made looking at her awkward. However, this was her uniform of sorts. You're quite early. Did you close shop early today? I asked. Pretty much. Fortune tellers don't have much to do when there are no customers. She took off the stole she was wearing and sat down across from me. But to put it frankly, she played with the skull-shaped accessory shining at her breast as she looked at me. Your house probably has nothing to it. What? What was it? Right, schema. Schema? Some word used in cognitive science. If you keep thinking you're scared, then you start seeing faces in the ceiling, that sort of thing. Because you were hearing squeaking every day, you began seeing numbers from the scratches that always were in your house. Seriously? Seriously. I mean, you came to Tokyo alone from super ruralness in Shizuoka, and this is the first time you're living alone, right? And then you're living in an old wooden house alone, so it's not too surprising. I used to live in a house that groaned and squeaked a lot, so I know how you feel. It's like the sound of saran wrapping, so it's pretty discomforting. So she said as she raised her hand to order beer from the waitress. Well, wait then. If this was just me being a wuss, then what should I say to the occult veterans that were coming to the offline meeting? Would I get banned from the wonderful site for being an airhead in just one night? Don't worry about it. She laughed. We're a bunch of folk that love meeting and trading shady stories. But it shouldn't be that simple. There were about 10 people coming to this meeting. And then Karasu said, huh? And looked at me. You hadn't looked? At what? This meeting. I think over 30 people are showing up. What? I hurried and accessed the Ikaiguchi offline meeting board through my cell phone, and then opening the House That Grants Wishes investigation thread and was taken aback. You're right. Why the numbers suddenly rocket? Are that many people interested in the House That Grants Wishes? Unfortunately, not at all. See, even the regulars, Sue and Zippo, are coming to the meeting, right? They wouldn't move for some mere horror story. Some horror tale? She laughed at the expression I made as she plucked the phone from my hand and then played with it. And then she turned the screen to me. This, the fourth poster going by the name Yoishi. I think this many people are showing up because this one announced their participation. Who is Yoishi? No idea. Said Karasu with a grin as she pulled out a cigarette. She lit the cigarette using a worn, slender lighter and after blowing out a puff of smoke, quietly whispered, "Those that meet Yoishi die 7 days later." What? There's more. Yoishi isn't a living person. Offline meetings that Yoishi attends end in terror. What else was there? What is that? Something like an urban legend that started being whispered around Ikaiguchi, yet no one's actually met Yoishi. No one knows if Yoishi is some old man or even what gender they are. However, everyone who attends a meeting that Yoishi goes to remains silent. The entire thread disappears, the participants stop going to Ikaiguchi, or they die. Her low whisper felt like ice-cold water splashing down the back of my neck. On the other side, Karasu happily received her glimmering cup of beer and exclaimed, "Ah, delicious!" with a lackadaisical tone. But those are just rumors, right? I asked, and she laughed. That's right. So basically, even if it's the house that grants wishes is a miss, there's the hope of Yoishi, so everyone's gathering for fun. So you don't have to fret about it any. She said, but I still felt mixed emotions. Until today, I was trembling with fear alone, unable to go home. And then I suggested today's offline meeting in the hopes of getting the opinions of the veterans of Ikaiguchi. Having the story blown off immediately as my misunderstanding wasn't sufficient to quell my fears. However, if Yoishi has gotten interested, might the house that grants wishes be real? Who knows? I'm just interested in seeing how Yoishi-kun's appearance changes a horror story that doesn't interest me into something more eerie. Doesn't interest. If it still bothers you, Ikaiguchi has a page for investigating haunted areas. You can request an investigation. Although I still think you'll just end up being laughed at. She laughed as she quickly finished her beer. Indeed, the Ikaiguchi site did routinely check out haunted areas around the country regardless of fame. After investigation, haunted areas were graded on a scale of A to D, with A being called the most dangerous of spots. This rating was very unique in that famed areas such as Masakado Kubiduka and Iwaniri were given a D rank by Ikaiguchi. In other words, they were rated as the lowest level of danger. Supposedly, it was because it had become an area that was evenly split, as humans and ghosts treated each other with respect. On the other hand, places given an A rank were often unknown to the common populace. Places such as crime scenes that involve murders brought forth by thick emotions such as infatuation and jealousy, isolated locales of death by seniors who maintained fanatic delusions, and so on. They say those places serve as lightning rods for souls that resented the current world, souls that had lost personalities and simply became clumps of malicious intent far beyond saving. As I thought such things, Karasu had begun peering intently at my face. "Hey, Nagi-kun." "Yes?" "You have the mark of a meeting." "Yes?" "And this is a girl." "Seriously?" My expression loosened at her words. "Can you tell me a little more?" She began playing with the skull-shaped accessory near her breast as she continued. How should I put it? It's a very dense meeting. Like two souls previously split are reuniting. But, she said, seemingly looking through me and at a different world. It's hard to say if meeting this girl will actually result in happiness for you. What's that? And furthermore... Huh? Wait, isn't she dead? Hey. Isn't that like being possessed? You gotta be kidding me, I thought. But I also remembered that she would tell me such ominous things every time we met. Previously, she told me I had bicycle luck and then I got hit by a momocycle on the way back. And then she told me I had gold fortune and was happy, but then I stepped on a gold-colored thumbtack at home. In other words, she was very good at presenting unfortunate things in a way that you can't tell it's unfortunate, which is an important skill for a fortune teller, I suppose. You know, Karasu, if you're a fortune teller, shouldn't you also tell people how to avoid misfortune? I asked. But it's up to the person whether to think of something as unfortunate. She stuck out her tongue in a cute way and then shouted to the employee passing by, "Another beer, please!" As I sat there watching over her in a vexed manner, the door chimed sound repeatedly, and suspicious-looking people filed in one after another. Seeing how they were coming over after noticing Karasu, I deduced that they were people attending the offline meeting. Yo, Karasu, as beautiful as always. Long time no see you too, Maru. I'm so excited. We have such karmic dispositions. As such conversations continued, my seat in the back of the family restaurant slowly became surrounded by activity. Every now and then I would see a familiar face, but most I had never seen before. I'd actively been participating in offline meetings in Tokyo, and that I continued seeing new faces en masse each time made me realize how deep the world of the occult was. Just after 11, the group that had gathered at the back of the family restaurant, with the odd interest, had passed 30. Or rather, I'd picked the family restaurant figuring there'd be 10, so this was pretty big transgression. The looks from the waitresses passing awkward smiles at me hurt. Are there more coming? I quietly asked Karasu, who was engaging in friendly chat with other attendees, and she was a bit blushed as she responded, "It's way too late now." There are a bunch of people who show up without saying anything, so there'll probably be a few more. That's problematic. This might scare away Yoishi too, she commented lightly, but this might really be troublesome. So, which one's Yoishi? As expected, not even an hour passed before the conversation blew past the house that grants wishes. The countless occult veterans crammed into the family restaurant, each looked around them, frantically looking for the accursed Yoishi. "All right, I propose introducing ourselves," said the middle-aged man going by the handle Professor with his blushed face. Seeing empty beer mugs scattered around his table revealed how drunk this person was. And then in response, others chanted, "Yeah, let's do it!" And one by one, people stood up and gave a greeting. As at least half the participants were getting quite drunk, people began feeling less like occult maniacs and more of a complete drinking party. First, I'm Professor. My preferred area of occult are stories from people of post-trauma ethnicity. Second, I'm Rabbit. I love folklore about Ryomen Sukuna-sama. Third, I'm Harley. I get excited by stuff related to ooh parts. At the moment, I'm researching Voynich manuscripts. What are they going first, second, third for? And why are Rabbit and Harley both jumping on the wagon? The occult maniacs were very playful, and so they began introducing themselves one by one. With incredibly loud volume, I alone seemed to be taking the blunt of the customer stares from the rest of the restaurant. Seventh, I'm Karasu. When she energetically stood up, a round of applause arose, and in response, she began socializing every which way, so I gave up. Come to think of it, It could be said that every offline meeting for Ikai Kabuchi turns out this way, and so it's like a trait of the site. Here, Nagi-kun, it's your turn next. Urged by Karasu, I begrudgingly stood up. 8? I'm Nagi. I'm a university student. What type of occult do you like? I like anything wonderful, but right now things related to ghosts. When I lightly responded to a question that had been flung at me, people began shouting, "You're too tightly wound! You need to drink more!" And someone ordered a beer for me. Man, I'm still 18. I'm underage. I can't drink. Don't worry. I'll drink it. Just act like you're drinking and they'll be appeased. Laughed Karasu as she smacked my butt with her palm. Well, in any case, the 30 or so people introduced themselves like this. And the conclusion? There was no one here who went by the handle Yoishi. Huh. So they didn't show up. I showed up to see Yoishi. Is anyone faking their handle? Said people one by one, but given that most had never seen other and that offline meetings weren't particularly rare, it was hard to figure if anyone was lying. Well, since we've all gathered, can we discuss what the house that grants wishes is? I began, but Sue spoke over me. I think. An old veteran of Ikai Kabuchi who managed a liquor store and liked collecting things like the arms of Tengu and the shell of Kappa, if I remembered correctly. Yoishi might be a different handle of Krishna. I was sighing, but reacted to that name. That would make sense, someone responded. If we summarize the rumors involving Yoishi, if you deal with Yoishi, you'll have a terrifying end. Yoishi isn't a living person. Those that meet Yoishi die 7 days later, something like that. But we've never heard any specifics of anyone dying, and maybe certain threads were disappearing because Krishna was secretly joining the horror area investigations? Is what I think, anyways. I see, nodded even Karasu. Krishna hasn't been showing up lately either, so that makes sense. Wait, please, I chimed in. Krishna, as in the administrator of Ikai Kabuchi, Krishna? Everyone's met him? Met him, or rather, he's always showed up to meetings before. But he's not here today? You want to see him? Of course. The reason I became interested in the site Ikai Kabuchi in the first place was being the person named Krishna was so fascinating. Of course, part of it was that I was interested in the occult from the start, but there was a different sort of attraction with Ikai Kabuchi. That was apparent, for instance, by looking at the odd words at the top of the page. Things that bother people also bother ghosts. From the start, Ikai Kabuchi was a site intended to soothe matters between people and ghosts. Most people can't see ghosts. That's why, regardless of our lack of ill intent, that we probably bother ghosts more than they do us was a perspective that was both fresh and unique. And as I read articles about renowned horror areas on Ikai Kabuchi, my conviction deepened. Each article was filled with care toward ghosts, taking care to show respect toward both the living and the dead. I always wondered, why are people always afraid of ghosts? Perhaps some ghosts play tricks on people while other ghosts say, "Come on, stop it," and are stepping in and intervening. Yet no one ever thinks of that possibility. Maybe that sort of order is maintained by ghosts and is why the vast majority of people live without ever being bothered by the supernatural. That paragraph struck a chord with me in particular. These words moved me when I just arrived in Tokyo and hadn't met anyone I could call a friend. I realized more than ever that people were connected to other people through candor. It gave me courage that I could make do in Tokyo, where it said that people's relationships with other people are often weak and diluted, where people try to avoid needless interaction with other people as much as possible. That was actually why I began participating in the site. I became attracted to the person named Krishna by their daily updates of the wonderful. His deep yet wide-ranging knowledge of the occult, his in-depth cool writing style, the truth that could be felt from each and every word. These were all things I lacked and were packed with things that my soul needed right then. I got to the point where I felt like Krishna had become like my brother and father in Tokyo. And if I could, I wanted Krishna to investigate the house that granted wishes himself. How old is Krishna? What kind of person is he? Nagi-kun, you're stuttering. Calm down. Here, have a drink. Undeterred by the interruptions by Sue and others, I rephrased my question. Please tell me, how can I meet him? However, the response to my question was an awkward silence by the 30. I think he won't show up at an offline meeting again. Why? Some things happened. Some things? Well, eventually. You'll find out. Leave it be for now. I only received vague responses like that. What broke the silence at the family restaurant was Zippo, who I think worked as a programmer. I oppose that opinion. That opinion? Asked Karasu, and Zippo pushed his thick glasses up and slowly answered. That Yoishi and Krishna are the same person. That thought. What do you mean? Actually, I know of someone who's met Yoishi at an offline meeting. Really? The gathering immediately rose in unison. What sort of person? How old? Guy, girl? Which offline? They all asked, and Zippo quietly answered. The offline meeting was for an investigation of an abandoned hospital in the Tama prefecture, about half a year ago. And what was Yoishi like? Well, I don't know. You don't know? Karasu asked, and Zippo swallowed once before answering. Because he's hospitalized. Hospitalized? Psychiatric ward. And with that, the excited gathering returned to silence. It was as if something heavy had descended upon the seats. Hospitalized in a psychiatric ward. Is that Yoishi's fault? Asked Sue, and Zippo slowly shook his head. I don't know, but even after regaining consciousness, all he mumbled is Yoishi. That's why I came to this meeting, because if Yoishi came, I wanted to ask what happened at that offline meeting. Everyone fell silent when Zippo stopped speaking, and then the family restaurant was filled once again with stories of Yoishi. Come to think of it, was the type of statement preceding conversations as one after another tales of Yoishi leaked out from people. If I were to summarize such topics, it seemed Yoishi infrequently appeared on the Ikai Kabuchi forum. Its appearance was not common, but whenever it showed up, it would post in almost every thread providing opinions on everything, regardless of how maniacal the topic. Given the time of appearance, Yoishi could be imagined as an occult maniac that was sitting in front of a computer almost 24 hours a day. It had knowledge of the supernatural to rival Krishna, but their posts showed no signs of sharing the ghost love that defined Krishna. If anything, they could be described as more eerie, as if a dead person had eerily joined the internet. Maybe the rumors that Yoishi isn't a living person, they might be true after all, mumbled Jersey, who said he was a writer for a magazine. Remember that thread that popped up some time ago? I'm a ghost, but do you have any questions? Ah, the one where IP traces and PC and hosts all came up empty, so people wondered whether it was real? I'm of the opinion that ethereal forms have good synergy with computers and digital equipment, because, brainwaves are weak electrical signals too. You do hear a lot of tales of ghost writing online. Then, that Yoishi, mumbled Sue in a summarizing way. We can't see it. But is it already here? Those words sent a chill down my spine. I looked around the brightly lit store. It wasn't just me. It seemed like everyone felt something cold. After that, the gathering seemed to decide to avoid talking about ghosts, Gradually, seats became arranged by topic as people broke off into their areas of interest. As the host of the offline meeting, I wanted to bring back the original topic, but I was certain no one remembered anything about my house. Furthermore, Sue was telling fascinating, eerie stories, and that was too interesting to pass up. A box bought from an antique store that could not be opened, ghost stories involving paper money found behind a painting on a hotel wall, a laughing girl who spoke often to a doll. Each provided entertainment that could leave you sleepless when alone at night. Everyone forgot about time as they enjoyed the endless flow of occult discussions. And at around 1 a.m., the offline meeting dispersed. Wait a second! I chased Karasu as she flagged a taxi while glancing at the Ikaikubuchi members scattering in small groups. What about my house? The house that grants wishes. And then the useless fortune teller waved her hand with a completely flushed face. No problem. It's that, schema. And what else? I was gonna tell you something else, but I forgot. What do you mean forgot? Don't worry, you have the mark of a meeting. See ya! She smacked my back and then happily jumped into the stopped taxi. I stood there dumbfounded as I saw the taxi turn off. I wondered if it was all right to go home. To that house. The house that grants wishes. I walked toward the train station using the main street, dragging along the momocycle that I'd bought really cheap online for commuting to school. Tokyo was filled with people even late at night. In particular, the area around the train station near my house was close to many universities, so there seemed to be no difference in the amount of people milling about from noon to night. Right around where I could see the station, I almost ran into a pair of girls and apologized. One shot me a "who's this punk" look, but the other smiled and said, "I'm sorry." I apologized once more. That was all there was to it, but it filled my heart with joy. Indeed, a fateful meeting was lying in wait for me. And a girl, no less. This might be good. The bizarre events tormenting me at that house must surely be a build-up for the happiness that awaited. In the future, I would look back at it and laugh it off. I felt less burdened when I thought of it that way. And this way, I wouldn't have to move out. Moving costs would be painful for me, given that I was receiving no aid from home. The offline meeting was fun too. I can't keep complaining. I mumbled to myself and I finally straddled the bike. I turned completely around and decided to return home for the first time in a few days. No one that came to the offline meeting today said anything about the house that grants wishes. If you look at it from another angle, it means it can't possibly be a ghost incident. It's a bit shameful as the original poster, but it's all good in the end, right? What would have happened if I dragged people over to my house and it turned out that there were no ghosts? I'd just be a laughingstock. Having finished arming myself with logic, I faced the soft, comforting night breeze and powered the pedals. I'd recovered to the point where I may have even hummed. However, I noticed it when I was about to re-enter the main street from the arcade in front of the train station. There was a strange, abnormal feeling on the back of my left foot. It was like I was constantly stepping on gum, so I stopped my bike and took off my sneaker right there. And then I lifted my left foot a bit, looked at the sole, and froze. All of my good feelings were extinguished and I felt my blood freezing. On the back of my sneaker was engraved the number 4. Damn it! What the hell, schema? The countdown was continuing. I pushed the momocycle along with mostly a half step, and every person passing gave me a strange look owing to my frantic look, but I paid them no heed. I threw away the sneaker with 4 engraved on the spot. I couldn't continue wearing such an eerie thing. The cold of the concrete and the scattered pebbles pierced my feet through my socks, but I didn't care. Why? When? When was 4 carved into the back of my sneaker? What was going to happen when the countdown ended, and how would I be able to escape from this terror? I had no idea, but in any case, I kept running. People in fancy clothing looked at me and laughed, but I didn't care. I just wanted somewhere with a warm atmosphere. Where? Where would that be? Eventually, I found a discount shop open late into the night after passing through the arcade, and I jumped in. A stupidly bright theme song was playing in the background. The mass of products were incredibly cheap, and I sang along with a simple, repetitive melody. Flamboyantly dressed girls avoided me as I stood there, leaning against a shelf holding cosmetics and mumbling to myself. An employee asked me, "Are you unwell?" And I finally realized that my left foot, which was only covered by socks, was throbbing. When I looked, perhaps I'd stepped on a shard of glass on the way, I saw the socks had been cut and bloodied. I bought bandages, socks, and the cheapest sneaker and cleaned the wound in the bathroom. I cleaned the back of my foot, placed the bandage, and wore the new socks. The cheap sneaker had a shoddy design and wasn't very comfortable, but it was better than being barefoot. It was an unnecessary expense, but I felt comforted. I was afraid of being in the bathroom alone, so I returned to the inside of the store and took deep breaths as I wandered around the store as if window shopping. What should I do now? I thought, but could come up with no answer. At some point, I'd just begun standing in front of a show window absent-mindedly, and the employee from before asked if anything was wrong again, so I left the store. There was no helping it, so I began heading toward the net cafe I'd been using before, but it was already full. I peeked into the nearby karaoke box, but there was even a line spilling out into the street. I tried wandering around several stores, but they were all the same. Come to think of it, it was Saturday night. There would be no openings until the first train. However, I couldn't think of any other place to go. I wandered around the station while dragging my bike, and the police would shoot me suspicious looks. I almost felt like it would be more comfortable to be arrested, but some level of common sense remained in me, so I turned back to the main street. The headlights of cars on Itsukaichi Street illuminated me as they passed by. Normally, the cars just looked like fuel-consuming devices, but today I felt consoled by them. It was invigorating to look upon things that could be scientifically explained. However, I may have been at my limits. This was no different from being homeless. I had no one I was intimate with enough in Tokyo where the light never dims. I had no place to go, and I was running low on funds. I spontaneously looked at the night sky, but just as there were no clouds, there were also no stars. It was just an obsidian dimension that stretched on as if painted. Perhaps I could call my sister and borrow some money in the morning, and then go back to Shizuoka. Tokyo was too much for me, which was something humiliating to say, but this was just too unexpected. I'd imagine most people would have trouble with such a case too. Mother, I'm sorry. You supported me so much in coming to Tokyo. Then, I saw a strong light at the end of the night street. When I looked up, I realized I'd come back to the family restaurant. I see. This was also open 24 hours. That was enough to make me feel like I'd found a million alleys, and my knees almost buckled. The drink bar here was cheaper than the net cafe, and there were plenty of people about due to it being Saturday night. I should have just stayed here from the start. I laughed to myself dryly, and I must have been very hard to approach with how I looked. Anyway, I left my motorcycle at the bicycle lot for the family restaurant and then was about to enter when I recoiled. There was something even more bizarre that made me not want to get any closer. Outside the big glass window to the store, inside the fern thicket that seemed to have been planted to cover the store, was a girl dressed in full black. She wore a black long coat even though it was spring, and her long hair that stretched down her back and her skirt and her boots were also pure black. Yet her skin was abnormally white, and she was crouched in the darkness so it looked like only her face was floating. What is she doing? She was standing in the middle of the thicket and almost pressing her face against the glass as she stared into the store. It was so creepy I was about to back off. But then she slowly turned to face me. Her face was shockingly white and the face was perfectly aligned. She was so perfect that I felt like saying she must have been a construct, like a giant beast doll that had accidentally been left there. That's the impression she gave. A night-colored girl. Unexpectedly, those words popped into my head. Those were the colors of the girl's eyes. Maybe it was because of the lighting, but it felt like an inordinately large proportion of her eyes were taken by her irises, and that under the long lashes they seemed to have a jet black glimmer. Below her straight-cut front hair, they shone a dark color as they gazed upon me. "Are you..." My mouth spoke naturally. "Yoishi?" The girl silently nodded. Next time on Phenomeno.